Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thanks for stopping by. Just to remind you that we're hosting Aaron Ramboui at Mindspeak this Saturday at the Intercontinental. 9:30 a.m. is breakfast, 10 a.m. is when we start. And he actually was in the office not too long ago, and he told me he only started to play the keyboards when he was 17. Previously, he'd been a drummer. And he described his music as a fusion of jazz, benga and gospel. And it's going to give us a 360-degree view of music from hosting festivals. He's the convener of all that jazz, and I think there have been 13 of them, and he was describing how he goes about it, and it's quite lumpy at times. And he was also describing to me the cyclicality of earnings for a musician, and all of this to be liberally sprinkled with his wonderful music. So I think it'll be a great Mindspeak to end the year. Of course, it's a free-to-attend forum, intercontinental, and Aaron is the guest, and looking forward to that very, very much. All the Cuban news took me back to the Buena Vista Social Club, which was this fabulous movie, and I'll put up the link for the music for the soundtrack, which was co-authored with Rai Kuda to some degree, or he was the producer, and it really is very good. And then I couldn't resist this photograph: Cuban cigars, why Obama's new policy won't mean a new flood of cohibas from Havana. I really would like to go and pay a visit, I must say. Jeff Koons has got a retrospective going at the Pompidou Centre in Paris, and he's always enjoyable to look at. Pope Francis Pontifex celebrated his 78th birthday yesterday with tango, cake and chicken. I must say I'm a big fan. And I'll put up an image that was tweeted by ABC of the Pope cutting his cake. We have to recognize Barack Obama's bold and historic gesture has taken perhaps the most important step of his presidency. This is Nicolas Maduro. It has emerged that the Vatican had played a central role in clinching a deal. Pope Francis sent warm congratulations. Of course, the diehards down in Miami, such as Florida Senator Marco Rubio, interpreted it differently. The White House has conceded everything and gained little. They gained no commitment from Cuba on freedom of press, freedom of elections. No commitment was made to establish political parties or begin transition to democracy, said Florida Senator Marco Rubio. I concluded by saying I think the president is making some bold moves here. Iran might therefore be the maraschino cherry atop the cake, if this Cuba move is the first in a continuum. I'll put up a photograph of Barack Obama greeting Cuba's President Raul Castro as Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff looks on at the memorial service for Nelson Mandela. That was December 2013. And the article in The Guardian is saying the apparently accidental meeting was the culmination of 6 months of secret talks. I'll put up a photograph I found of Fidel Castro in New York in 1959. The whole Cuba story is so evocative, isn't it? Rich in imagery. I'll put up an image of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the front page on October the 23rd, 1962. That was when the naval blockade on Cuba was imposed. Another one of President and Robert Kennedy deep in a huddle during that Cuban Missile Crisis. A recently found photograph, very powerful as well. You remember my theory? Well, it's not mine. Image repertoire and how we look at images, and they imprint themselves on our mind in a way that words do not. And I like this photograph of the Havana sunset that I found. Nicholas Taleb, who's on Twitter, and Gregory F. Treverton have written a tremendous piece in Foreign Affairs called the calm before the storm, why volatility signals stability and vice versa. Even as protests spread across the Middle East in early 2011, the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria appeared immune from the upheaval. Assad had ruled comfortably for over a decade, having replaced his father Hafez, who himself had held power for the previous 3 decades. Many pundits argued that Syria's sturdy police state, which exercised tight control over the country's people and economy, would survive the Arab Spring undisturbed. Compared with its neighbor Lebanon, Syria looked positively stable. Civil war had torn through Lebanon throughout much of the 1970s and 1980s, and the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005 had plunged the country into yet more chaos. But appearances were deceiving. Today, Syria is in a shambles, with the regime fighting for its very survival, whereas Lebanon has withstood the influx of Syrian refugees and the other considerable pressures of the civil war next door. Surprising as it may seem, the per capita death rate from violence in Lebanon in 2013 was lower than in Washington, D.C. That same year, the body count of the Syrian conflict surpassed 100,000. Why has seemingly stable Syria turned out to be the fragile regime, where always in turmoil Lebanon has so far proved robust? The answer is that prior to its civil war, Syria was exhibiting only pseudo-stability, its calm facade concealing deep structural vulnerabilities. Lebanon's chaos paradoxically signals strength. 15 years of civil war had served to decentralize the state and bring about a more balanced sectarian power-sharing structure. Then talking about the unit size, along with Lebanon's small size as an administrative unit, these factors added to its durability. Free market economy as well. In Syria, the ruling Ba'ath Party sought to control economic variability, replacing the lively chaos of the ancestral souk with the top-down Soviet-style structure of the office building. This rigidity made Syria and the other Ba'athist state, Iraq, much more vulnerable to disruption than Lebanon. Syria's biggest vulnerability was that it had no recent record of recovering from turmoil. Countries that have survived past bouts of chaos tend to be vaccinated against future ones. Thus, the best indicator of a country's future stability is not past stability, but moderate volatility in the relatively recent past. Taleb wrote in his 2007 book, The Black Swan, dictatorships do not appear volatile, like, say, Syria or Saudi Arabia, face a larger risk of chaos than, say, Italy, as the latter has been in a state of continual political turmoil since the Second World War. Past experience can be extremely effective when it comes to detecting risks of cancer, crime, and earthquakes, but it is a bad bellwether of complex political and economic events, particularly so-called tail risks, events such as coups and financial crises that are highly unlikely but enormously consequential. It's a brilliant essay, I must say. Some political systems can sustain an extraordinary amount of stress, while others fall apart at the onset of the slightest trouble. Simply put, fragility is aversion to disorder. Things that are fragile do not like variability, volatility, stress, chaos, random events, which cause them either to gain little or suffer. Saying for countries, fragility has 5 principal sources: a centralized governing system, an undiversified economy, excessive debt and leverage, a lack of political variability, and no history of surviving past shocks. Applying these criteria, the world map looks a whole lot different. and then going through various another paragraph, city-states, both old and new, from Venice to Dubai to Geneva to Singapore, owe their success to their smallness. Those who compare political systems by looking at their character without taking into account their size are thus making an analytic error. And then talking about, most democratic was Venice, most enlightened but autocratic was Singapore, and then saying just as an elephant is not a large mouse, China is not a bigger version of Singapore. Second soft spot is the absence of economic diversity. Economic concentration can be even more harmful than political centralization. And then saying, a loss of a single source of income should not dramatically damage its overall economic condition. Places that depend on tourism, for example, are particularly susceptible to perceived instability. And then third source of fragility, highly indebted and highly leveraged. Debt is perhaps the single most critical source of fragility. It makes an entity more sensitive to shortfalls in revenue, and all the more so as those shortfalls accelerate. As Lehman Brothers experienced when it collapsed in 2008, as the confidence of investors wanes and requests for repayment grow, losses mount at an increasing rate. Debt issued by its state itself is perhaps the most vicious type of debt, because it doesn't turn into equity. Instead, it becomes a permanent burden. Countries cannot easily go bankrupt, which ironically is the main reason people lend to them, believing that their investments are safe. Leverage raises risks in much the same way. This is interesting. Dubai, for example, has plowed money into aggressive real estate projects, increasing its operating leverage and thus making any drops in revenue extremely threatening. Profit margins there are so thin that shortfalls could easily accelerate, which would rapidly push the Emirates companies into the red and drain state coffers. This means that Dubai, in spite of its admirable structure and governance, can rapidly go insolvent. Fourth source of fragility is a lack of political variability. Saying it is political variability that makes democracies less fragile than autocracies. Italy is resilient precisely because it has been able to accommodate virtually constant political turmoil, training citizens for change and incubating institutions able to correct for mild instability. The idea is analogous to child rearing. Parents want to protect their children from truly serious shocks that they might not survive, but should not want to shelter them from the challenges in life that make them tougher. Saudi Arabia is an easy call. It is extremely dependent on oil, has no political variability, and is highly centralized. Its oil wealth and powerful government have papered over the splits between its ethno-religious units, with the Shiite minority living where all the oil is. For the same reason, Bahrain should be considered extremely fragile. Egypt as well, given its only slight and cosmetic recovery from the chaos of the revolution, and its highly centralized and bureaucratic government. Venezuela as well. Then there is the China puzzle. China's stunning economic growth makes its future hard to assess. The country has recuperated remarkably well from the major shocks of the Maoist period. That era, however, ended nearly 4 decades ago, and so the recovery is hardly a recent comeback, and thus less certain to protect against future shocks. What's more, China's political system is highly centralized, its economy is dependent on exports to the West, and its government has been on a borrowing binge as of late, making the country more vulnerable to slowdowns in both domestic and foreign growth. Are the gains from past turmoil big enough to offset the weakness from debt and centralization? The most likely answer is no. That what gains China has accrued by learning from trauma are dwarfed by its burdens. With each passing year, those lessons recede further into the past, and the prospects of a black swan at Beijing loom larger. I said it's an excellent article, worth considering, is the increased sophistication of currency, oil and cyber warfare, which few countries, even those with hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves, have the wherewithal to withstand. With respect to Iraq under Saddam, Libya under Gaddafi and Syria under the Assads, they were stable states until key NATO-led interventions were made to tip the balance. It was the insertion of a third operator that tipped the balance. I think his point about Saudi Arabia is well made, and it feels very similar to the Peacock Throne did before it fell. Put up an image of small coffins of Peshawar's students. This is what Pankaj Mishra has written. Small coffins of Peshawar's students are the heaviest burden on our conscience. The murder of children crushes our soul. It destroys the already frail hope without which life becomes unbearable, that there is justice in our world. Adults commit unspeakable atrocities against each other in the name of religion, race, nation, and profit. But none of our many competing gods has yet explained why the innocent young should suffer for the sins of adults. And saying it won't help to blame religion for a phenomenon that is so clearly rooted in a catastrophic loss of the religious sense. The kids were shot point blank one by one, according to Bloomberg. Syed Basit Naqvi was sitting at his desk when the principal at his army-run school in Pakistan rushed into the classroom and shouted for the guard to lock the door. As he did, 3 militants stormed in and started shooting. The guard dropped dead first, followed by other students hit by indiscriminate fire. The attackers then lined up the remaining schoolboys and started shooting them in the head one by one at point-blank range. When they came to Naqvi, he ducked his head, a move that saved his life. Put up a photograph of Pakistani soldiers walking amid the debris in the school a day after, and then Shaima Khalil of the BBC tweeted a photograph of the hall where more than 100 kids were shot, and it's really probably the most haunting photograph. Mr. McConnell, who I follow on Twitter, has tweeted, Magnum have tweeted the best photographs for 2014. You have to go to these links, and then I've given you the number to look at them. One is of a blind musician taken in Kigali, very evocative. 2, Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, of the beach, and it's really evocative. 3 is the remains and the corpses of the passengers of the Malaysian Airlines shot down over Ukraine. That photograph was taken on the 17th of July 2014. And I go back to what I wrote on the 25th of August when I referred to His Excellency Johann Borgstam, who said, the signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal was the disappearance of the MH370. And I said the uncertainty around MH370 and MH17 is sharpened by the way the story seemingly turned on and off. Interesting Fed meeting where Yellen has made it clear, in a funny kind of way, that the Fed's patience on rates has limits. The remarks were called clumsy because they retained their stated intention to hold rates near zero for a considerable time, but said it can be patient in its approach to raising the benchmark lending rate. The last time they said patient, it took about 3 months for them to raise rates. Statement was muddled, said someone else. They were worried if they dropped considerable time that markets would think rate hikes were imminent. What they're doing here is slow playing the transition. By the time of liftoff, participants expect to see some further decline in the unemployment and additional improvement in labour market conditions, Yellen said. Also expect core inflation to be running near current levels. Most officials see the first rate increase taking place next year. At the same time, forecast shows central bankers expect rates to rise more slowly over the next 3 years than previously anticipated. I think she's just one big headline print away from being compelled to hike rates. Euro 123.45, dollar index 88.99, Japanese yen 118.55. Swissy 0.9728, pound 155.90. It's above 157 yesterday. Aussie 0.8140, India rupee 63.215. South Korean won has been on a losing streak, 11.0514. Rial 271.54, Egyptian pound 715.02. And the rand seems to have stabilized around this 1160 level. The Bloomberg dollar spot index just off a high set in December, the highest level since March 2009. It's up the dollar 13% in the past 6 months. I think it's going a lot higher. Put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. Let's see what happens when they put up rates. Euro dollar, my target is parity. I'll put up a chart of the Russian ruble, which appreciated 12% to 60.22. Remember, it hit 80.1 on December 16. It's still down 46%. It's a full-blown currency crisis, currency warfare, call it what you will. But interestingly, the currency hasn't broken. It's bent, out of shape, but it hasn't broken. Which goes back to the point Taleb was making about having, if you've previously been buffeted by such a scenario, it makes you stronger. But it's one heck of a currency and oil war. Crude oil put up a 3-day chart, $56.88. Got squeezed above 59 yesterday. Have a look at that short-dated chart, 3-day chart. I still think we're going to $50. I'll also put up a 3-month chart, and I'll put up a chart for gold, which I think will go to below 1,000 next year. Outside call, of course. Very interesting article in Morning Star about frontier markets and how it's been less volatile than emerging markets over the last 3 years, and it's a good deep dive into frontier markets. Have a look at it. It's linked under frontier markets. Sudan's intelligence chief warned South Sudan against hostile moves from its territory, saying any incursion by rebel forces based in its neighbor would be treated as an assault by Cuba. In comments broadcast by a Sudanese news channel, Mohammed Atta named 2 camps in neighboring South Sudan's northern Bahr el-Ghazal state and urged Juba to disarm the rebels there. We say to the South Sudan government that peace is better for you and better for us, and ask them for reciprocity in not harboring any armed movements. Katrina, of course, was in Juba, and she's now reporting on a report by the IMF which says action needed to avert catastrophe. In the first Article A4 consultation with South Sudan since the country became an IMF member. The fund paints a sorry state for the country with the highest per capita income in the region bar Kenya. In the report, foreign exchange market is distorted, reserve buffers are critically low, the fiscal deficit is growing, social and infrastructure spending is inadequate, governance problems abound, and public financial management, especially oil revenue management, needs to change radically. Real GDP has fallen consistently by 25.1% in 2011-2012, by 26.7% in 2012-2013, and an estimated 7.5% this year. They're only pumping 160,000 barrels a day, and oil was providing 95% of their revenues. Central bank reserves have fallen to $379 million, enough only for 3 weeks of imports. Dire state will continue without dynamic reform. Key reforms needed is around the exchange rate. Sudan runs an overvalued official currency, and black market rates are rising. The rationing of foreign exchange allocations entails a hidden transfer of resources from the government to those with privileged access to foreign exchange at the official rate, losing the equivalent of 9.5% of GDP. It's not clear that there is enough awareness in the top leadership as to the impending economic crisis. They need to be aware of the catastrophe that is bringing on themselves in the region. I found this picture on Twitter from Old Pics Archive. Samuel Doe, shortly after taking over the Liberian government in 1980, South African all shares up 2.218% in 2014 has lost 3,573 points since the 21st of November. Put up a photograph of the sunset in Johannesburg from 257 days ago. Dollar Rand seems to have found some support at this level of 11.60. Egyptian pound official rate at 7.15, but obviously there's been some volatility in the black market rate. The Egyptian stock market had a fearful beating yesterday, down 4.59%. It's up 19.7876% year to date, but has corrected 1,453 points since December the 8th. The Naira closed at a record low on Wednesday, down 3.6% on the day, at 187.1 to the dollar, after the central bank said it would hold its foreign exchange auction of the year, its last foreign exchange auction of the year, on Wednesday. The Nigerian all shares slumped 2.78%. It closed below 29,000. It's at 23-month lows and down 29.925% year to date. The all share index has dropped 30% this quarter, the fourth worst performer among 93 gauges tracked by Bloomberg. They're in a very big spot of bother, and I said it on the 10th of November when I said Nigerian Naira and all share had been wagadooged by the collapse in the price of oil. Currency heads to 200, I said on the 19th of November. I think it's 220. And, I called it in the eye of the storm. Again, via Tristan Connell, a brilliant piece in the National Geographic, bursting with a get-rich spirit that has made Nigeria's economy the continent's largest. Lagos is Africa's first city. Very well written. To listen to this, I'll just read you the end. Well worth reading in full. The city remains for now safe and a home for the bold, where even those who could be forgiven for despairing are instead eyeing the next rung on Lagos's golden ladder. I was told about a hustling fellow named TJ who apparently had a knack for acquiring how it wasn't entirely clear a reliable inventory of fashionable used clothes which he sold in a grubby store on Market Street, within walking distance of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The lanky entrepreneur greeted me, sized me up, and then proceeded to pull out several plastic garbage bags filled with men's shirts. Even when I was small, I believed there was something behind me, driving me, TJ said, as he rifled through the shirts to find something appropriate for me. I'm an incurable optimist. I don't believe in negativity. My customers, they love this about me. I cannot call myself a pastor, but I speak the truth. And the truth is, I love this country. People here are suffering. I'm suffering. And the government, they won't do the right thing. But it's all about attitude. I can feed myself, and one day I'll do something else. Still digging in his bag of used clothes, the salesman said, right now, I'm just trying to find the leverage. Aren't we all? Ghana Stock Exchange up 7.55%, 19-week highs. Interesting infographic about Africa navigating the cashless continent. Tanzania's Attorney General has resigned over energy graft scandal, which is interesting. Kenya's parliament is due to vote on Thursday on a bill to let police hold suspects in terrorism-related cases for a year. The proposed amendments include extending the time suspects can be held without charge to 360 days from 90 days. The amendments would also fine media organizations up to 5 million shillings for printing material that is likely to cause fear or alarm. The proposal does not define such material. The president said there is nothing to fear about the bill unless you've been engaging in criminal activities. 9 foreign missions in Kenya, including the US, Britain, France, Germany, Canada, Australia, and Sweden, I saw Johan was there, supported plans to improve security, but cautioned that human rights should also be respected. Further down on Rich Wrap-Ups, you can find that entire letter. Abapu Namwamba, an opposition member of parliament, called the bill draconian and a return to the past that we thought had been buried in the dustbin of history. This is a government that is looking to stifle dissent, said Patrick Gathara, a political writer and cartoonist. As I said previously, I think it's got to become more sophisticated, more targeted, and these sort of blanket restrictions are very counterproductive. Kenya shilling 90.403. Nairobi all share up 17.299% this year, but has corrected 4.3273% since closing at a record on the 8th of this month. NSE 20 has corrected 358 points, so for more than 6-year high reached on the 22nd of September this year. If you need to check any listed share, please go ahead. Every listed share can be interrogated. Atlas Development was cross-listed on the Nairobi Gems Exchange, raised 450 million Kenyan shillings. Logistics. I congratulate Asia Kanji, who won a prize for the best portfolio at the NSC, and she received that from the CMA, so well done to her. Pan-Africa Insurance got the nod for their gateway insurance, and as the announcement is linked on Rich Wrap-Ups. But we're living in very volatile times. I think the best thing to bear in mind is I think we have had an inflection point, and it's moving dramatically away from petro producers, commodity producers, back to consumers. But nevertheless, the world itself, as Cuba moves, is very interesting, peeling Cuba off Russia. But it's still a very hard-nosed game out there, is the way I feel about it. Once again, thanks.